Yeah, as Nick said, I am senior consultant for Unai Limited, and they are a Bristol company. We do all kinds of data science and web development and other kind of projects as well in digital health and other areas. So it is consultancy really. But what I want to talk about today is really health data, because that is quite something that's of interest for me, as I have been in health data, I guess you could say, for a long time. I did my doctorate in biochemistry, so you could say that's molecular data as well. So I've always been interested in this, and that's why I think it'll be an interesting talk for you all as well. And what I want to talk about is what is health data, where is it stored, and ultimately leading to a conversation about ownership. And I would also like to mention some of the interesting analysis and other projects in the open source community. But first of all, I would like to start by presenting this statement. Health data is valuable, it is diverse, and it has many controllers and uses. And while a lot of you might already agree with this in entirety or in part, I hope that the talk today will convince you as well to why that is the case. And before we can delve into the analysis of the whole ecosystem of health data technology, we need to first understand what health data is and how it is defined and where it comes from as well. So here I'm showing 4 different types of health data, but this is by no means an exhaustive list. It does, however, capture the most prevalent data types currently used in research and in clinic. So first of all, a lot of us will be familiar with clinical data, such as records for hospital visits or GP appointments. And these can include information about illnesses, surgeries, allergies, procedures. And these kind of records have really been collected since the beginning of medicine, even though now we are able to collect them at ever vaster quantities and resolution. Images have also evolved from hand-drawn pictures to X-ray images and digital images now. And today we use technologies such as MRI and CAT scans, as well as images of slides of, for example, cancerous tissues and fluorescent molecular markers, which at least in my nerdy scientific mind are fun to look at. I encourage you to look them up yourselves as well. They're great fun. The next one is genomic data. And Human Genome Project and the sequencing of the whole human genome unlocked a floodgate of interest in the science of genomics and genomic data as well. And as sequencing has become cheaper, the availability of sequencing and testing has increased exponentially. And now data is also available within both healthcare and research. In the UK, we are on the forefront of genomic research and genomic medicine, with initiatives such as the Genomic Medicine Service. And I guess moving forwards in time, another interesting development of the 21st century has been the advance of use of stream data in healthcare. So those of us who are familiar with illnesses such as diabetes or high blood pressure know how important it is to continuously follow your blood sugar levels or blood pressure readings. So anything that can make this process easier has been supported by patients and healthcare professionals alike. And while this is not very widely used in healthcare settings, due to its potential, there is a lot of anticipation for improved devices and data analysis. So, in my opinion, this particular hierarchy not only captures the diversity and the evolution, but also the need for different technological solutions. So, for example, clinical data is something that would be stored in a fairly regular database. It is quite structured. You can certainly structure it. So we are quite familiar with it as technologists. However, when you start to look at images, these are files that can be gigabytes big, and there will be hundreds of them, while genomic data is 1 or 2 hundreds of gigabytes worth of files. And streaming, of course, is a different type of file as well. So even though it's all health data, you immediately can see that even technologically, it's quite different actually. So where do these come from? And I've given some examples. So one of the data sources that has become especially crucial in the current COVID-19 pandemic has been self-reported data. For example, through symptom trackers. Here people can supply their health status and other variables and symptoms to a database, and that can be really quite useful. There are lots of initiatives out there. Examples such as behavior or food diaries have also been used extensively. We already talked about genomics data, and molecular and omics is also expanding. This is becoming ever more important. We talked about device data that comes from wristband and other devices, while clinical and imaging data mostly lives in hospital databases, although that's not always the case, but it will be most likely. And here's another interesting one, environmental data. So you might not immediately think that that's health data. However, for example, one of my colleagues carried a Geiger counter while visiting Chernobyl, while others have been involved in measurements of air quality. This is environmental data, but it's also very important for our health for obvious reasons. So there's lots going on. And of course, we are now also recognizing how important population data is, such as local and national census and socioeconomic data, as that's helping us to understand diseases and disease prevalence. So we've talked quite at length about different types of health data. So, okay, where is it stored? And yeah, this is possibly another quite meaty slide, but I would like to introduce you to 3 different technologies. And as in many other fields, health data comes with its own language and acronyms, so I apologize for those. So we have 3 things here. First one is electronic health record. That's another one that's quite familiar to you. If you would go to a GP and you would sometimes see that they put in data in this web-looking form, most likely it is going to be one of the EHRs. And what it does, it allows the doctors to put in your information about your symptoms, suspected diagnosis, medication, etc. And it helps them to make better decisions as well on how to treat you. However, given the complexity of such medical data, healthcare professionals often are strained with the increase of admin work required to fill in the patient details. So this kind of technology contains medical history, images and laboratory results, etc. And it gives this more longitudinal population view because it is held in a shared database, or at least a complete database. And the access to this is controlled by healthcare professionals mainly. So the other side of that coin is the personal health record, where data from professional sources, such as electronic health records, and also data generated by individuals, such as food diaries, for example, can be a source of health education for the patients. And so this is data that is actually controlled by the patient. So they are mostly in control of it, at least what they see. These technologies tend to be purpose-built with a variety of features to fit the needs of specific groups of patients. As you can imagine, the needs of patients with diabetes would be very different to those for patients with mental health issues. So quite different again. And perhaps those were known to some or most of you, but I think not a lot of you will know about the trusted research environment. So this is the third layer, and to me it's quite interesting as it contains data for research, and that can be a variety of data. It can be clinical images, molecular, all of the data types that I've mentioned so far for the individuals. And the aim of the trusted research environment is to securely access and analyze health data so that the security of information isn't compromised and it doesn't leave the environment necessarily, or if it does, it gets closely monitored. And here the data is mostly controlled by the research institution or any other organization who is the main data controller. So they'll assess who gets access to the data, and when you want to access this kind of data, you need to apply generally and say, why do you need to do this analysis? Why do you need to access this? So for the more technically minded, I've put together a little diagram of what an example trusted research environment could look like. And while the actual implementation can be very diverse in terms of hosting and deployment, you can have on-premise, so that means all the data is held physically within the location where it's been created, in cloud, or a mix between these two in any which way. They tend to have these general components when they are fully imagined. So first of all, we have the storage. We already talked that there are different data types that could be there. So I've mentioned the four that I already discussed previously. And since, as I said, they're all quite different data types, it means they can't be stored in the same database. However, it's quite important that they are linked. So there is a central database that is able to control the fact that there are clinical records of this patient and also genomic records. So you can access and view both for the same patient. And obviously, accumulation of data in this way is quite powerful and gives you new insights. So then, of course, you get the computational layer, which helps with analysis. And of course, it comes in different flavors, depending on whether you need an efficient database query or analytics run on a 100 gigabyte human genome file. The aim of the research environment is to provide the safe and efficient platform for data exploration and analysis. So the analysis layer needs to be flexible enough to allow novel analysis scripts to be run alongside some of the more conventional tools. And it might include tools for exploration, containers to run scripts, visualization tools such as notebooks or dashboards, and other and other more specific components, depending on what is the aim. However, collaboration is also important, so secure chats or emails can also be part of the trusted research environment ecosystem. And as you can see, these are quite large and potentially complex digital ecosystems. So they come with these additional models of authentication, of course, very important, data management, who actually gets to see what, and of course, help desk, as unfortunately, mistakes and errors and whatnot does happen. It's life. So we've talked about where things are being held, and I already mentioned there are several different layers of control. And the opinion often is that patients should own their own data, such as the quote here from Eric Topol. And at least in my, and so this is quite, I guess, a personal opinion on what data ownership normally means. To me, it means being able to view and use your data for your own goals. So your data being the data that's about you. And you can do that, for example, through NHS app or the patient health records. But this is an expanding niche rather necessarily the norm at the moment. When you have your own IP, you could imagine that you are able to sell and give away data. So basically to gain benefit from it. And there are, again, initiatives that allow you to monetize your health data or use it to connect to clinical trials that benefit you better. And of course, you want to be able to control access to it and delete it. And you can use NHS opt-out or other consent mechanisms to do this. So I've answered yes to all of these questions. So do you actually own your medical data? And you could say yes, but actually it's not quite as simple, as you are not the only controller of your data, especially once you've given consent for it to be used. And in some cases, this consent is implied. If you are in a hospital and you're saying what's wrong with you, the implication is that you don't mind sharing this data as you want to get better. So, and therefore access to health data is often controlled by your medical personnel, hospital, or indeed the nation, as it currently is seen at the time of the pandemic. So the biggest reasons, in my mind, why ownership is not really a good framework or idea for health data come from two features of it: how you derive value and how you create it. So first of all, there is a big debate about who actually is the creator of the data, since a lot of it wouldn't exist without the involvement of a medical professional who can provide diagnosis and other measurements. So in this sense, it is data about a patient rather than a data they have created. And extraction of value is the public good debate, as of course, it could be that your data can't do a lot of good for yourself, but it can do more good for others. So withholding it can at times be seen as moral hazard. And even more so is the aggregation, as once you start to aggregate medical data at local, national, and international levels, you can achieve more than you might on a single individual data point. And of course, this is not quite true it's quite true for a lot of types of data. The more you have, the better it becomes. But I think for health data, it is quite unique in that sense that there is this expectation to do more public good. So, and we've gotten to analysis now. So with such a diverse set of data types, sources, storage, ownership, it would be hard for me to give much advice on how to analyze health data. So I just wanted to quickly mention some of the trends that I've observed in my position as a consultant in UNAI. So natural language processing and understanding continue to be very important, as a lot of current and historical data happens to be text. So it gets used in chatbots, helps support medical coding, and indeed mental health. Eliza, the first chatbot, was great for mental health. It performed better than some psychiatrists, people say. We also talked about aggregation. So linked and federated data is also being increasingly used. So you are able to do this through trusted research environments, for example. So linked means that, for example, two different data sets, one from a hospital and one about genomic data, about the same patient, can be linked to a common identifier and then can be used to retrieve information from both of those types. Well, federated means that these two data sets live in different places. And while it hasn't been a massive thing, we do see an increase in open source at all levels, local, national, and international. And I would like to quickly also show you some of those projects that I know of and have been shown to me by other people. So I do encourage you to have a look at them, see what you think. Maybe it is useful for your own research. And yeah, I definitely encourage you to look at it. So at the end, I started by saying that health data is valuable, diverse, and has many controllers and users. And I hope that you agree to that now. And so I would like to leave it by saying, so we should make sure that those who require access can do so safely and for the benefit of everyone. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Laura. I'm going to unmute everyone so that we can give our appreciation for that talk. Thank you. So now, if there are any questions, if people want to type their questions into the chat window, and then we will ask people to unmute and ask the questions to Laura.
It looks like it's currently you and me, Nick. Who else would like to ask a question?
Let's give people a second just to rack their brains.
Yeah.
Is anything triggered any thoughts there? I mean, maybe I should kick off.
Yeah.
So this thing about data ownership. Ownership is quite a strong word. I was wondering whether there's a weaker word like data stewardship, where you can actually say, well, you can use this data, but for within parameters, like within, say, I want to set those parameters up front, so I know that it's going to be deleted, or you can use it for a specific purpose and then it's gone. Presumably that is already a thing in the industry.
Yes, absolutely. So I already mentioned NHS opt-out, and there are a lot of consent mechanisms around as well, especially in research, for example. So you are able to say, do you want your data to be used in research? Do you want to know about it? Do you want to be contacted, etc.? So there is some granularity there already, but it seems, at least in medical data, a bit all or nothing.
Mm-hmm. We've got a question from Bruce. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, Bruce?
Yo. Yeah, my question was more about, I guess, data outside of this realm. which is to what extent do you think our health data is being sold and used by other actors without our particular knowledge or consent? Like, I don't know, Google knows you search for specific symptoms, or WebMD sells your data to advertisers, and then you get like ads for, I don't know, fungal foot cream or whatever.
Well, that certainly can be a possibility, but it's hard to say anything without a proof. And it depends on how sensitive you also view that health data. For example, I guess it's always the kind of thing, would you tell a stranger this, for example, or a pharmacist? So while, yeah, and that is also individual data, and what it is used for, is it used for, so in this case it's used for AdWords, but yeah, it can get more serious if it's bigger data sets, of course. So I do certainly hope that doesn't happen.
Theano, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you. Hi. I think my question is quite big and general, so I don't know if it's simple to just answer it on the spot, but recently some people have had concerns about, for example, the NHS tracking app in terms of how the data collected is used. How can we, as developers, both create applications that respect data privacy and also convince the general public that they do respect data privacy?
That's a really good question, actually, as I believe one of the biggest things that we as developers can do is to really be outspoken about these values and learn about it. You know, we often, as developers, we get taught, or we learn about languages, about algorithms, everything like that. But we don't necessarily get taught about ethics. So one thing I would say that as a developer, you can definitely educate yourself on what does that mean, and have the courage to be outspoken. Although, of course, that is a big ask. And for companies, it really is important to show trustworthiness, to talk to your customers, to do everything that you can, say, well, this is what we're doing with the data, and be open about it and be truthful about it, as eventually the truth will come out.
Cool. I think we can probably take one more question before we go to the panel. Is that okay, Nick?
Yeah, cool.
So Roger, are there lessons from the world of health? Sorry, do you want to unmute yourself and ask that question, Roger? Sorry.
Yeah, are there lessons from the world of health data that you think are well enough codified to be applicable to other sources of, pervasive data? So things like IoT sensors around the house.
Yeah, it is. Oh yes. So are you asking if that is possible to be a health data?
Well, I was thinking that health is a very personal, obvious thing, and so work's been done codifying practices and is understood.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other sources of data which aren't obviously health data, but,
yes,
but could be as personal. If you have sensors around your house, it may know who's visiting you, it may know what you're doing, it may even be able to deduce your health. But I wondered whether things are codified and understood well enough that it's possible to say, if you're collecting that sort of data, these are the things you need to be aware of.
Well, that's a good question, and that is something really to look into. Health data, at least, is quite well protected under a lot of laws, including well-known GDPR. but of course, then again, then you start to wonder what actually is that definition of health data, certainly legally. And data from census, I believe, is just so novel. We know that in a lot of places, legislation just cannot keep up with the speed of development, but that shouldn't stop us from trying to do the best that we can to ensure the privacy and to ensure the security of data.
Great, thanks, Laura. I think that's all we've got time for the Q&A. We're going to move on to the panel, and I'd like to introduce a couple more people to the floor here. So we've got Stephanie Campbell, who is founder of Occo Health, and we have Ian Craddock, who is the institutional lead on digital health at the University of Bristol. So as a start of a 10, Ian, maybe you could explain, we've heard a lot about health data, and your institutional lead for digital health. Could you explain the difference between the two? What is digital health?
Okay, so first of all, lovely to see everyone on the call this evening. So a little bit of this comes back to one of Laura's earlier answers, and so we all understand both the potential and the risks around our health data. And the way that I think about digital health is actually encapsulating that kind of the computer science skills that software developers have, with an awareness of the ethical, regulatory, and legal frameworks that we have to work within. So our aim with the students who study digital health at the university is not to give them just an education in AI and in software development, but also to look at things like behavior change, psychology, ethics, and elements of social sciences as well. So I think a data scientist, it's very clear what they do. I think a digital health expert needs a broader set of skills, and I think many of the questions here this evening have touched on what those skills should encompass.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's good. So do you want to bring there's some questions to bear for Stephanie and Laura to answer, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say a lot of these questions I think have been we've seen elements of them in the questions from the audience this evening, which is really great to see. So I really wanted to ask Stephanie and Laura. You both actually work for commercial organisations, companies who are dealing with health data, and you're building businesses that are employing people and generating value for society and for your employees and shareholders. You yourself, though, will need to be forming relationships with other companies that you need to partner with, because usually companies would have to do that, which might involve needing to share data with those companies who are perhaps going to process it on your behalf. So when you are looking at a partnership with a company, what do you look for that gives you comfort that those companies are safe to work with and they understand the importance and sensitivity of that data that you might share with them? Difficult over Zoom, I know. Maybe Stephanie first.
Yeah, certainly. I love thinking about this and chatting, because when you've got a small business like we do in Bristol, you're always really the only way that you can grow is by partnering up with other organisations, either to get data in or to help analyse data. And so for me, I think the most important thing to consider is, who are the individuals that I'm working with in that organisation, and what is it that motivates those individuals? And also, what is it that motivates that company or that hospital, or the department or whatever? What's in it for them if we work together? And do we share those same values? Is it just that a company's been set up and it's moving into health just because they know that that's a really hot area in terms of market growth? Because there's lots of people have become aware that health data is very valuable in a financial sense, or is it that organisation that I want to work with actually really believes that there can be some good done? And that's very much what motivates us at Occo Health. So we work in data about vision, eyes, and trying to keep people's eye health good and strong their whole lives. And so Yeah, it's kind of, it's almost like not just the brain, but also the heart being engaged as well. You know, do we read off the same page?
Laura, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree. Values are very important to Unai as well, and we make sure to explain them to our customers and to show them on our website as well. And as a consultancy, one of the things we try to do is due diligence, which might involve, for example, looking at the standards of accreditation, such as ISO 9001, which involve security and other processes, as well as ISO 13485, which is more for medical devices. And a lot of them signal that this is a serious company who really has put in the effort to be in that space, to be as secure as possible, want to move and know how to assess those risks that are inherently associated with the use of health data.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. And you're sort of asking that. Oh, sorry.
No, Stephanie.
I was just going to add to that and say, you know, that there's so many processes that when you deal with health data, you really have to look after it. And so you don't want an unevenness, you know, with one part of that partnership, you know, really looking after that data and knowing how to protect it, and the other half not really caring what they do with it. That's just a partnership that in the health world absolutely won't work together. So even though there's a lot of regulations coming in and we're all kind of trying to catch up and get used to them, I think just knowing that you're both working towards the same thing is important. And when we think about, I think the other thing that sprung to my mind was, if you're doing a project together, really defining what will success look like. So are we both going in the same direction? If we get to the end of this project after 3 years or 1 year or whatever, this is the outcome that we're going for. Is that the same outcome that you guys are going for? And do we know what it is that we're working towards? And so, for example, you know, early diagnosis is a big thing for us. Is that what both parties would be happy with when they share and analyse that data together? I think that's how you really know when you're onto a good partnership.
Okay, yeah, those are really great answers. Thank you. And interesting point, I think, that Laura made about the importance of regulation and standards. I mean, regulations and standards are like the most boring things imaginable, and they proliferate and they have these enormously long acronyms. But you know, and of course, the unfortunate thing is they take some time to come together. It takes time for there to be consensus for a regulation to be drawn up. And that consensus always lags behind what technology can do. So it can never outpace technology. Technology always gets there first. Mm-hmm. I think it's incredibly important as a community that we engage with the regulators and that we're vocal about the risks in the state-of-the-art technology, so that regulators can adopt laws and frameworks that protect not just individuals, but companies as well. So thank you so much for that. So another question that I wanted to ask you both, and perhaps this time starting with Laura, is that as a company looking at another company, of course, you talk in terms of regulatory frameworks and standards, and are they certified, and do they have everything documented? However, when it comes to talking to an individual patient, of course, they don't know about that world of regulation and standards. So what's the nature of the conversation that you find yourself having with patients who wish to be reassured that the service is safe and reliable?
We don't generally talk to patients, as we generally tend to be the middleman as a consultancy. However, I guess I could answer that question about talking to other companies and how to make sure that we are trustworthy. So it's really important for us to have an honest dialogue and understanding with the client that we have about what are their needs, what is it that they want, what is it that they need, and to really find that best solution. And that is what we find ourselves in creating and in really going that extra mile to understand them better and discuss whatever it is, and try to see, okay, is that really all? Is there something more? And try to push them both in terms of technological advances and sometimes even ethical advances as well, if we can. So that is something that we would do if we would see, oh, is there a change that we could suggest, we would definitely do so. And that's it. And I guess that's different from what Stephanie might say as, yeah, being a consultancy is quite different from being a company that creates a product. But I think you'll probably agree that trustworthiness is one of the most important characteristics in this equation.
Thank you, Laura. Stephanie?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have much more to add to that. I thought that was great.
I suppose. Have you found yourself in a position where you have been maybe dealing a little bit more directly with patients, and you've needed, either yourself or your team has really needed to explain maybe as part of a consent process or recruiting patients to a study or for product development? How do you communicate your values as a company without using the language of regulatory frameworks and standards?
Yeah, like you, I get really bored really quickly of regulatory frameworks and standards. So yeah, I mean, I'm quite lucky. So I've had a background in the NHS. So I've been part-time in the NHS for 10 years. And I think so I really know, I feel like I've really got to know patients and what my patients, it was because of really listening deeply to what the needs of my patients were. It was that why I left the NHS and decided to go down the startup route. And so when I think, it's quite easy for me because, I'm able to explain that I have a clinical background. And so often that really helps. And so I would say, for people who don't have a clinical background themselves, making sure that they've people in their team who do gives a lot of credibility, and really just being, we're very upfront with our patients about, so I shouldn't say our patients actually, we have to call them volunteers in this context, about the product we make for them. And, I had a group of volunteers on the phone this morning, and we do this thing in OCO called user-led design. I think what's really funny is that I spent my time in research looking at numbers, and I know the importance of numbers and of data, but actually you can create an amazing thing, but if it's not trusted and if it's not used by the person it's intended to be used or by the team that it's intended to use, then there's actually no point in having done it as well. So I'm a real convert, starting out in mathematics and moving towards the more social science. And so we do user-led design, and it's not just about making something and then testing it on individuals who are going to be using it, but it's about being inspired by those individuals. So saying, well, I've got this idea for this kind of product, what are your needs? And tell me what it is that you want as an individual service user or patient, and tell me what it is that what data do you want to see on the interfaces? How do you want to interact with it? How many times a week do you think you can be bothered checking your eye health? And how do you want to receive that information back? So we ran a focus group this morning, and one of the volunteers said something really interesting, that they said, well, if I push my data through your platform to the hospital, does that mean that any eye doctor can look at that data? Because I only want my personal eye doctor to look at that data. So there's certain things that you would never have thought about. I think it's perfectly fine for any doctor who's working that day to be able to check that data, but for that particular individual, that wasn't what they wanted. And so there's a lot of complexity comes, and it's really only by putting the patients first that you learn those things that might actually be reflected in a broader grip and might actually be really important.
Thank you, Stephanie. Actually, I'd like to follow up that actually. So that kind of patient-centered, patient-led or volunteer-led process that you described there, you're a relatively small local company. Do you think that is something that the nature of your company makes you kind of positions you better to do that type of partnership working with a patient, as let's say, as opposed to a multinational corporation who already has like 1,000 products on the market?
Yeah, 100%. I think that because we're really small, it's just easier for us to get feedback and to have our ears in the ground and to make adjustments. So we have, our team has a daily meeting every morning, even though we are, of course, all working from home at the moment, we have that daily meeting. So it means that if there was something that came up, even at 5 o'clock the day before, suddenly the whole team knows about it. And if there's a change that we can make quickly, then we will make it quickly if it feels like a sensible thing to do. So we're really lucky not to have layers and layers of process to go through. And that definitely keeps us agile. I think one of the really crucial things that we've benefited from is actually partnering up with a charity who specially support people with one of the particular groups of eye diseases that we look for. And so working through that charity, that was a partnership that took about 6 months to build the trust for them to work with us and know that we really meant. That's helped us to have access to loads of volunteers, and so we kind of rotate them so that we're not bugging the same ones every time.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting, and certainly you could imagine a big corporate really struggling to write the business case as to why they should be working in such complex sort of iterative partnerships with patients and charities. That sounds, it sounds like a really good place for a smaller, more agile company to be working. Okay, so I think just about the last question that I was thinking that I would ask you is that really interesting that obviously we're here talking about data, but actually the word we've heard most about is trust. And so this is really a conversation about values. And of course, there are ways that you can acquire trust. You can acquire trust by virtue of everyone knowing that you're going to be sued if there's a data breach, and that someone's going to come and give you a massive fine if you let any of the data slip out. But of course, that's kind of, that sort of punishment, the kind of the fine, the information commissioner's office could give out is really, a bit too late in the process. Everything's already gone wrong by then. So it strikes to me that the solution to a lot of these problems is really about a culture within an organization or a company. So I'd kind of like, maybe Stephanie and then Laura can come in. I'd like to ask you a little bit about how you make sure that the culture of the staff in your company means that you feel that, that the company is kind of like safer as a result, because you trust that your own employees really understand the sensitivity of the data that they're working with.
Yeah, so we have an onboarding process for every new person that comes in, that, because quite often people come in from a software background, and so we say, look, here's what health data is, here's the reasons that we look after it really well, here's what could happen if it went wrong, and ultimately, when we look after data really well, here's the awesome stuff that we can do with it. But I guess, there's certain things, certain processes that we've had to put into place, to make sure that we don't have, for any of our volunteers who are essentially somebody's patient, that we're not writing loads of stuff down in notebooks and leaving that on the bus, or that, for example, somebody had a near miss with a laptop, so we had to say, right, don't take your laptop to the pub, and this kind of thing, and so our technology team get involved with making sure passwords are really secure. So it's, some of the basic stuff like that. But to be honest, for me, it's more of a culture thing, as you say, and it's more about how do we build up really open communication so that inevitably when something goes wrong, because something will go wrong, and certainly in software development, little things go wrong all the time, hopefully not the big data breaches, but how can you create an environment so that when inevitably there is a data breach, maybe sometime, that we'll know really quickly and that we can act really quickly and do something about it. So I spend a lot of my time making sure, that we have the right kind of team with the right attitude in order that they are really open with each other. And so when we do little processes where perhaps we send out a release of the app that we use to measure people's vision, and there's a problem with it, something doesn't work properly, what we do is we sit down together as a team and say, okay, did we use our process properly? And often that process gets built as we go along, and then the processes usually get built when things go wrong. So we look back and we say, right, You know, it's not about whose fault was it, but it's about saying, how could we have prevented that from happening? Let's put an extra check in place to make sure that doesn't happen again. And there's this real tension between piling in too many processes and being a startup and being fresh and being fun and all of those things.
Yeah, you kind of want to be fun, but not really too much fun when it comes, comes to this area. Laura, any observations from you about that kind of point about culture?
Yeah, I thought Stephanie gave a great answer, as I would definitely agree with the points that culture and processes are really important, because from a point of view of an employee, it is reassuring to know what to do in case something goes wrong. And also it does take a lot of courage to notice that something potentially has gone wrong, and then to go and talk to your superiors as per the processes. So it is therefore extremely important to have that culture of no blame, and so that you can come forward, as that will make everyone's lives better, and that is so important that I can't say it enough.
Yeah. And I wonder as well, you know, even on things like websites, you know, for now, when we come across a new company, the first thing we do is go to a website. And one of the things we learned from a nice digital health company called Hospify was that, and I'll put their link in the chat shortly, but they have loads of documents readily available on their website, so that any hospital that wants to work with them can just know what they're signing up for. So they say, look, here's all of our data policies, here's what we do to protect the data that you share with us. And initially I felt a bit sort of resistant to that, because it makes it feel, okay, you're leaving yourself wide open. But actually I really took that on board and thought, okay, let's do the same thing. And let's, when we do our privacy policies, let's be completely open about, here's how we intend to use your data, and being completely open about, you know, here's when we'll get in touch with you, here's, you know, here's what we'll not do. I think that's really important as well, saying here's what we will never do with your data. And in our little vision and mission, which isn't on our website, but certainly we have share with our employees, and you know, we'll now share with future partners, you know, that says here's our red lines. It's really good for investors as well to say, you know, if you want to work with us, you're signing up to a company that knows where its red lines are, and here's the things, you know, for example, at OCO we want to make sure that eye care doesn't get more expensive, so we want to reduce the cost of it over time. So I think that's really, because if you write them down early and you commit to them, you'll start to recognize if your ethics change over time.
Yeah, I think that's a really great idea. And I think also as well, thinking about onboarding new employees or the recruitment process, you know, recruiting people who ascribe to the values that you've been upfront with is obviously, that's doing half the battle for you, because you know you're bringing the right people into the team who ascribe to your mission and are going to help you achieve it, I guess. I think from the university's perspective, I mean, we're joined on the call this evening by a lot of the new digital health students at the university, and everything that we've heard really is in line with the training that we're offering them, where responsible innovation is a core and compulsory element of the program that they'll be getting. I'm sure for many of them that was one of the things that attracted them to the course in Bristol, is that you know, like all of us, they ascribe to those values as well. So I think we are kind of running out of time. I don't know if there are any questions that we can ask from the floor. We do have quite a few. I'm not quite sure which ones will be easiest to address. Actually, so related to one that's in the chat, I think perhaps I will just ask Laura and Stephanie just to take on the topical matter of, we talked about protecting data, and Laura started to talk about the extent to which we should protect our data. So obviously we live in a time of pandemic. We live at a time when we all expect to see in the newspapers how many cases in our area, what's being done to develop vaccines, what do you know about the R rate, and how fast are things decaying, and are we safe to go out? And the reason we know those things is because people have given their data, their diagnosis, their symptoms or whatever has been sucked up into a big national system, and then it's displayed for our benefit. So collectively, we benefit from the fact that all this data is kind of going to a central kind of trusted place. So it's kind of a social contract that actually we're not holding on to our data, that this data is available for the authorities as part of our public health system. So I wondered if either of you had any observations, particularly in the year of COVID, where the balance lies between owning our data and donating our data. Maybe I'll start with Stephanie.
So the reason I'm smiling is because we're currently having this discussion with, with a particular, one of the particular hospitals that we're forming a relationship with, like who should own the data. And, I believe that patients should own it because, in the future, you just don't want it to be exploited in any way, and therefore, why should it belong to someone else if they're profiting financially? We think about the American healthcare system, for example. They profit financially anyway, so actually, why should they make additional money for something which is very, very personal to folk? You hear these stories, don't you, about things being sold, and so what we're looking at in OCO at the moment is for people to gift their data to us. So that we can agree to say, one of the things we say, for example, is if you gift your data to us, when we share it with one of our partners who analyzes the data, what we'll do is we'll use your age and months, but we won't share your date of birth. So just being really, explicit about that kind of thing, and actually saying if you gift it to us, then it means that we can gift, and just being very clear, like what will we do with that gift of data, and part of the reason in health data that gifting, I think, is important is because you don't always want to have to give it back. So for example, if we make this amazing algorithm that helps to diagnose people's eye disease 3 months earlier or 6 months earlier or years earlier, if we get to know that that algorithm really works, and somebody says, oh, I'd like my data back, well, I can't really remove their data from that algorithm. So it's a very practical thing as well as an ethical thing, I suppose.
Laura, how about you? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I thought those were really good points, that it is, so in that sense, sharing data, it benefits not only you, it benefits everyone. And it can be that, as I said, even though it doesn't benefit you, it might benefit your society or your children in the future. And there is a precedent for that in medicine. Certainly, people donate their bodies to the science. There's also now quite a few different biobanks which contain both samples of blood and etc., as well as data. Actually, the UK Biobank project, for example, is massive. It's 500,000 people, and even the whole genomes are sequenced. And I'm sure you can imagine what a treasure trove of data that is. And this is something that they've essentially given away, but for the benefit of both themselves, potentially, although even they might have opted not to receive any information about their own problems in the future. But they're certainly benefiting the future people.
And I would love to ask Ian a question, if that's all right, because I know, Ian, you take amazing data from sensors, and you figure out health data essentially from what one wouldn't think could possibly come from something non-health related like a sensor, and some of that information is coming from inside people's homes. And I just wonder whether you had a particular viewpoint on on that data ownership when it could be particularly personal.
Yeah, so we're in a slightly different context. As a university, we're not developing a product or a service. And actually, one of the things that I've been wanting to do in our research is actually to understand what you can infer about these other sources of data, because we all buy smart home products, we all walk around with mobile phones, we do our Google searches, we have smart thermostats, and all these things are very, very common technologies to have in our homes. And if subsequently it's discovered, for example, that these technologies can work out that you're at risk of I don't know, dementia or something in 20 years' time, I would really like universities and the public to know about that before somebody who sells smart thermostats works out that they can do that. So my aim at the university is, because we are not developing a product and we're not trying to monetize this data, is to do these difficult things so that that can be out there in the public domain and we can publish that. And so regulators, for example, can then get in and say, hang on a second, actually that data which you didn't think was medical data actually does, you can infer someone's medical state from that, and therefore that now needs to be protected in the same way that genomic data needs to be, or clinical data. So, but that's kind of a role for a university, and that's kind of what we're here for.